Greetings, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome to In-Depth. We're joined by management scientist Dr. Fleary, and we are looking at analyzing business for development. It has been some time, Dr. Fleary. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me, Decay.
Definitely our pleasure. And one of the things I appreciate in our conversations, Dr. Fleary, is the fact that you bring a different spin to many conversations that you can be hearing kind of floating around. So when we look at analyzing business for development, when people say, okay, well, they want to take the business to the next level, they want to do better, what are some of those things that go into creating the strategy to carry the business where you want it to go?
For a long time, Decay, business in this part of the world has been done from the camera is cutting off at my chest, but if I could put the camera a little lower, you would see my belly. So business has been done from a gut feeling, and we need to move away from that, and we are actually starting to move away from that, I would say, as an economy. We need to use things like processes and systems. We need to use things like data and analytics. And of course, we need to have methodologies in place to innovate, to ensure that we could consistently and reliably get the type of results that we need for growth and performance.
Now, in trying to move away from our gut, what are some of those references, factors that would make you say, okay, well, I need to transform my business?
Right. Now, the idea that we're moving away from our gut, that could be a very hot topic, because some people would say, but some of the best ideas are from my gut. And so I don't like to say moving away from gut, really. I like to say that we cannot make business decisions solely on gut alone. All right. What are some of the things we need to look at? Well, in order to understand what is going on around us, both competitively and in the economy, we need data to do that. In order to understand how our company is performing, we need data to do that. So data, I would say, is the backbone of all decisions. Uh, and we should ensure that if it doesn't exist in our organization, that we find ways to build it into our processes and systems so that we can do fun things like innovate and create new products and services.
And how does that data collection look for different places? Because I can see if you are going to a place where you need to fill out a form the first time you're going there, that is
Yeah.
very different from somebody, possibly the doubles man, saying, okay, well, I used this amount of sheets today to
Right.
wrap. And even that might be broken down into whether or not something had to get double wrapped because it was a triples versus a doubles. So what are some of those ways we go about deciding, okay, well, this is the instrument that I will use for data collection?
Right. Well, it depends on the line of business that you're in and the type of data that you would typically come into contact with. Of course, all businesses need to understand their customer base. So some of the uh, common data points that you would capture would be who are my customers to begin with. Then, of course, based on your line of business, you would want to understand what are some of the product categories, for example, that I would have within my business. Then you would want to understand things like inventory levels, understand our customers, which is the demand side, and to understand our stock, which is the supply side. All right. So we need data to manage both the demand side and the supply side.
And then so, okay, well, we have the data now. Are we taking it and using that in different tiers, different ways to use that data? And once again, I guess this may also depend on what the business venture is.
Correct, correct. So, you know, I think before we can create any product or service, we need to understand how people's perception of not just the product or service, but the business. All right. That understanding will help us to keep relevant. And you know, I recently engaged in a Complete Caribbean IDB training. It's called the Economics of Innovation. And one of the important points by a presenter in that forum indicated that the companies that were most resilient during COVID-19 were the companies that actually innovate prior to COVID-19. And these are the companies that had a higher propensity to use data to make decisions.
And I want to fasten your business, Dr. Fleary, in terms of the relevance on economics of innovation. I think sometimes when people think innovation, they say, but that's an extra expense that we don't need at this point in time. But
right.
And it makes me wonder the difference of making that distinction between expense and investment. So
right.
Where are you on the side of the fence, and what are some of the things that kind of came out of that training? See, I loafing on it for training too by proxy, I guess.
Right. Now, I mean, I'm about to conduct a workshop tomorrow, please God, on this very topic. Innovation doesn't have to be creating something new. Innovation could be doing something a little better. So, for example, when we innovate, if we were to use my methodology to guide the conversation, when we innovate, we could innovate on the system of an organization, right? So we can say this organization is doing something one way. Let's change the way in which this organization is doing the same thing that they are doing, but our goal here is not just to be effective, but we want to be a little more efficient at what we do. And that is innovation. Innovation, there are many different types of innovation, and that I just explained is called incremental innovation. It doesn't have to be something we created that didn't exist before, that more radical. We could incrementally innovate. And I would argue that much of our institutions in this country requires incremental innovation in the first instance, which doesn't have to come at an additional cost, but will come from doing things differently, understanding where we are and where we would like to be.
No, you say that, and I put it, and it kind of gets me a little nervous putting it against the backdrop of the 5-year cycles that we like to operate in. So, but I wouldn't even dive into that though. Where does artificial intelligence factor in when you're thinking about analytics and using information that we have in order to get better efficiently, innovation-wise? How does that factor in?
Well, AI, in order to use AI, it presumes that we already have enough data maturity to allow us to use AI, right? So I just had an analytics class with our year 3 business students here at Lockjack. And this very same conversation was had in that you're going to meet, there is a dispersion of data within organizations in Trinidad and Tobago. What does that mean? Simply put, different sectors within the economy would have a different approach or a varied approach to data capture and data storage. You could go into an organization and meet a large database that has data over a number of years. That rich data source we can use to do things like AI. However, you can go into an organization that still documents transactional data, for example, using one of the oldest forms of technology to do so, a pencil and paper, right? So it depends on where the organization is in regards to their data maturity will have a direct implication on what they can and cannot do in the short term. If the organization has a developed ecosystem in regards to data capture and data storage, then we can use applications that will enable artificial intelligence and machine learning. And ideally, what is the intention here? The intention here is that we have this data, we've described this data, we understand the data that exists in our keep. And now that we understand this data, we want to make predictions about what could possibly happen in the future as a means to manage what we are doing today to get the best outcome in the future.
And I think I want to pick up that conversation on the other side of the break. Stay with us. We're speaking with management scientist, Dr. Kevin Fleary. We'll return with more. Welcome back. We are going in depth on analyzing business for transformation. We're doing so with management scientist, Dr. Kevin Fleary. And Dr. Fleary, I want to pull some threads of things that you just said together and ask you to go forward from there. Thank you. In terms of the research showing that companies that did best during this pandemic, in the main, were already putting things in place to do so. They were already analyzing data sets. They were already crunching figures and saying how they could innovate, and sometimes that innovation just included doing what it is they were doing, but a little more efficiently. I want you to expand on that a little bit, please, in the sense that the importance of being proactive while using the information that you have to influence future footsteps. Thank you.
Okay, Dike. Ideally, the age of not using data to make decisions, I would say, is gone, especially in an environment that there are so many unforeseen events. All right. If we want to be able to manage and be adaptive enough to the changes around us, we need to have visibility of things that are occurring, not just within our immediate space, but things along our supply chain. All right. To be able to be responsive to these changes that are occurring. All right. Now, a company might think the cost of hiring personnel to do analytics, the cost of having a database to store data, the cost of the software to analyze the data is a lot. But not only would that investment into those assets help the organization be adaptive, it would also allow them to understand changes in the market on the demand side. Remember, I told you earlier, it's a balancing act between the supply and demand side. All right. And data allows us to understand and get that visibility that is required to do that balancing.
And I think even sometimes having a general knowledge of where your inputs come from along that supply chain. Because I can see the example of people saying, well, that's happening quite over there. That doesn't affect me. But not knowing that that space where that thing is happening, they create something that goes into the production of a supply item that you need from another area. So
Correct.
you're not seeing how these things are linked and how that affects you and how that affects the cost that you will have to possibly pass on, or how it is you will need to work with your budget a little bit. So having an idea of, okay, well, these are my inputs and these are the things that go into that inputs, I think is also something that is important.
Dike, since COVID-19, we all feel the effects of changes to the supply chain, whereby the prices of items in the country has increased over 3 times for certain items. Not once, not twice, over 3 times. And these prices are being absorbed by the consumer. Businesses, I would say, are now forced to find ways to become more efficient, to manage some of the inflation that is coming in through the importation of goods. Efficiency alone will not be enough to contain the inflation that we are experiencing or importing. However, it will definitely help us to cope with some of the price increases that we are experiencing.
So in terms of being a little more efficient, how do you think situations like this help the business models that we have? And I go directly to looking at food security and seeing that, okay, well, regional heads are now looking and seeing how they can shore up defenses to become more food secure intra-region, looking at opportunities and possibilities within the region and say, okay, well, this is needed, let us build it here, as opposed to saying, okay, well, we will go outside. Because sometimes you try to go outside, and even though you have the wherewithal and resources to purchase, it's just not coming in. Going back to those supply chain issues that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think in regards to, I do want to see the region get more independent in regards to the production of food and the distribution of food within the region. But we need to bear in mind that food production takes time, right? The amount of food that we import and the time it takes to import that food compared to the amount of time we have to invest in producing and rearing and supplying the food, there's a disparity there, right? But I would say that we definitely have the capacity to produce food. What we need, I would say, at this point, is to make the decision at the policy level, which I'm seeing is happening, and to make the decision at the business level. Businesses need to invest and support the consumption of, because it would require changes in eating patterns, Decay. Because I mean, some of the things that we import, in the short term, we may not be able to access it within the local space. So it will take some time, I would say, but definitely it's a good cause whereby we slowly reduce that import bill while investing in producing our own, especially with the high value items that we would import, like meat, for example.
Dr. Fleary, that's sounding like work,
It is a lot
especially
of work.
So those
It is a lot of
incremental
work.
steps, steps saying, okay, well, this is what we're working towards, and we know why we're working towards it. So I
Yeah.
guess that is where this meeting of the minds needs to take place in terms of business interests, persons, government policy makers, as well as people who are just looking and seeing, okay, well, this costs this, that costs that. What are we going to buy?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a substitution, a period of substitution, whereby as we slowly reduce the import bill, we increase local production. And also, I mean, we can't forget our basic principles when it comes to competency in regards to the creation of products and services in this space. So if our interest is regional trade, the increase of regional trade for food products and services, then are we leaving it open for every country to produce whatever they feel like, or are we going to have an agreement on who does what so that we can maximize outputs at a specific time? Because everything is time sensitive. Who is more efficient at doing what, and what is the stipulated time for us to have at least a first round of rice, sugar, meat, canned foods,
No, I was going to tell you thank you and close it up, but you raised something there, Dr. Fleary. What answer the person who says, is that kind of thinking that gets us into problems in the first place. So this
Okay.
person can do it more efficiently, so they do it alone and we don't do it. And when something happens or we fall out, we in a monkey pants.
Well, I mean, efficiency, Decay, what you just spoke to there was efficiency in one part of the supply chain. I am referring to efficiency in different parts of the supply chain. All right. Or I could say it in another way. In the Caribbean, there's a value chain. All right. And that value chain has different activities when it comes to the production of food. All right. Where are we going to be placed in that value chain? Is what I am asking. Should all the countries within the region operate in the same space based on their competencies? And if they are existing in the same space, what items would they focus on within that space? Because you see, when it comes to the basket of goods that we would want as a people, there are so many different things that can be done. And we would know about that basket and the contents of that basket by examining the food import bill and the type of purchases that people are making. So I would say from a data point of view, let's examine that food import bill, see what everybody is consuming as a nation and as a region, have a conversation on the policy level to see, okay, if people are importing avocados and bananas, who has the competence in the region to supply bananas? All right. Who has the competence in the region to dehydrate bananas? Who has the competence in the region to make value-added products with banana mash? You see where I'm going with this?
So this is why this is why it just underlines the point that you're an educator, Dr. Fleary, because yes, you're sharing information, but you're also giving people dissonance, asking questions that people will now go out to say, okay, well, these are some of the questions that I want to answer. I refuse to call it homework, but at the same time, building these sorts of questions that people need to do the work and inspire future conversations. And we want to thank you very much for the time that they shared with us. Management scientist, Dr. Kevin Fleary, looking at how we can transform business through analysis and being proactive with it. And on behalf of the entire TGT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth. Thank you so much for joining us.